Welcome, Everything is Brainhead, Chapter 2, Tahani, the Puppet Master for Good. This show is part of the Haha Brainheads universe. Thanks for being a Brainhead. We're really forking grateful. This is the second of a two-part series on Tahani's relationship to skill and identity. To watch the first part for free on YouTube, click the link below or the card on the screen. There will be spoilers. As we discussed in Chapter 1, Tahani's relationship to skill and identity really is the underpinning of her major character arc. It wasn't until she was able to shift her perspective and realize that it wasn't a skill issue that she was able to make progress. We watch from The Good Places Chapter 17, Team Cockroach, all the way through the finale, Tahani become able to make deep friendships, healthily repair familial bonds, and seek hobbies and activities that interest her. We see her learn how to use her skills in hosting, gaining feedback, and appreciating aesthetics to satisfy her. Not because she believes that the skills are going to provide her with the vicarious satisfaction from others through external validation that she used to crave, but because she's able to realize that growth and healing can be communal activities. I want to back up just a moment because there's an important element to Tahani's growth. I talked last time about how it was Chapter 18, Existential Crisis, that really changed her trajectory, and how she was a foil for Michael's simultaneous anguish. As Chidi said in that chapter about Michael, quote, "The good news is, if he can work through this, it's the first step toward understanding human ethics," close quote. While this episode was indeed the first step for both Tahani and Michael to come to grips with the reality of their inner world in a way that neither could be reconciled or ignored, they had very different reactions to it. Michael became fully nihilistic, and Tahani went into fight mode. Or, to put it in more psychological terms, which reminder, I am not trained on this, I just like to learn stuff, they both were pushed out of their window of tolerance. They both realized too quickly and too clearly the absurd and unending positions that they were in. They were condemned forever to confront the most sticky aspects of their beings, with no escape or reprieve. In some ways, I think that this was exacerbated by the fact that of the 4 trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, 2 were immediately and unendingly unavailable. They couldn't fully remove themselves from the situation, flight, and they couldn't stop moving forward, freeze. To do either would put both of them in more harm's way. So Tahani subconsciously chose to fight. We see it directly in her thinking process. She says, quote, "What if I throw a party that's so amazing that it's actually better than the party that's supposed to win? When they realize that they could have come to my party, they'll be sad. I won't be sad, they'll be sad," close quote. I think that this is her most natural response to stressors and trauma anyways, so I'm sure that it fit just like an evening glove to her. But before I keep discussing her reaction, I need to take a little detour. I mentioned the window of tolerance, so let's talk a bit about that. According to Psychology Tools, the, quote, window of tolerance was first introduced by Dan Siegel in 1999 as a way to conceptualize the optimal zone of arousal in which an individual can function effectively. Emotionally regulated, cognitively flexible, and socially engaged, closed quote. It's a heuristic or mental shortcut for allowing therapists and individuals to understand when one is no longer able to regulate their own emotions. The reason that it works as a heuristic is because there are 2 main categories of response when a person is moved out of their comfort zone and no longer able to regulate their own emotions: hypo and hyper arousal. Hypo arousal looks and feels like shutting down, going into autopilot, dissociation, memory loss, emotional numbness. It's often associated with the freeze response. If we were making a graph and emotional regulation was at 0, hypo, which means beneath, would be going into the negatives. Hyperarousal looks and feels like chaotic outbursts, defensiveness, racing thoughts, anxiety, restlessness. It's often associated with the fight and flight responses. If emotional regulation is 0 and hypo is in the negative, hyper, which means above, would be going up from 0. This can be a helpful framework because it can allow a person to understand when they've left the window of tolerance, and thus are not able to process, respond, or take in new information effectively. If you're so stressed or afraid or overwhelmed that you shut down or become super chaotic, you can't learn or grow. You're stuck reacting. Your body is trying its hardest to claw its way back to zero, back to emotional regulation, but it doesn't have the safety to do so. Anyways, back to the good place. So in chapter 17, Team Cockroach, Tahani makes the decision to work together to build a better Tahani. She hears direct feedback from Michael about how her corrupted motivations impacted her actions on Earth, and she sees the benefits of self-improvement. She's bought into the concept of the self as something that can evolve. She chooses to leave her window of tolerance. Then, almost immediately, her determination for improvement is dashed by the millennial demons being too on the nose. Imagine you go to therapy because you realize there's some aspect of yourself that isn't quite optimal. In session 1, the therapist gives you a diagnosis of a personality disorder or tells you that all of your problems stem from your fraught relationship with a parent. If you're not ready to hear that and haven't in some ways been exploring it yourself, it's gonna come as a shock and probably not resonate. So her choice to leave her window of tolerance is immediately met with an insane external push deeper out of that window of tolerance. And she fights, just as she did as a kid with her sister, just as she did as an adult with other celebrities, with her family, for status, connection, accolades. But this time, the fight doesn't work because the game is rigged. And she has no other choice but to sit in it and look at it and deal with it. Or is there another choice? Once she realizes that fighting doesn't work, what does she immediately do? She starts forking Jason. Distraction, avoidance. As Jason says later in the show, anytime I have a problem and I throw a Molotov cocktail, boom, right away I have a different problem. It's way easier to just create a new problem that takes up so much time and space and energy that you just can't deal with the first one. Now, I'm not saying that she did this on purpose, that it was a conscious choice, or that she was intentionally manipulating Jason. But I do think that her relationship with Jason became a great way to shove all of those fears aside about her skill, her identity, and her perspective that she just wasn't able to cope with or look at fully. Chapter 19 through 23, she doesn't have time to think about that deep, festering issue that her approach to engaging with herself and others has been fundamentally flawed due to a perspective issue, and that working on it will lead to shedding an identity that she feels tightly bonded to. Instead, she can work on more superficial issues like not name-dropping celebrities to avoid answering a question in the trolley problem, not controlling narratives to avoid responsibility for her actions in Janet and Michael, how her rigidity of standards led her to miss out on opportunities in Derek, and how working with others can have a better outcome than steamrolling in Leap of Faith. Don't get me wrong, I think these are great to work on, and I think that she makes a lot of progress during this time. But that doesn't negate my belief that her relationship with Jason was doing a lot of heavy lifting to make it so that she did not have to confront the more insidious stuff. She got a glimpse of that in the existential crisis, and she said, no thank you, not right now. I don't really think that it's a bad thing either. She's in this really weird state of limbo where she knows she's in hell being tortured, and her responsibilities are to be fake tortured in ways that poke at aspects of herself she's not ready to look at. And then also to take moral philosophy classes. She has no escape from the daily and nightly boot camp of self-improvement. It would make sense to me that she would want to find ways to cope, to subconsciously try to dam up the floodgates just a little bit, to seek some control over when and how she chooses to step out of her window of tolerance. I think a lot of people talk about emotional regulation nowadays. There's a sort of glorification of the term in therapy and therapized discourse and gentle parenting and trauma or survival content. But emotional regulation is only possible in a person's window of tolerance. and that is such a deeply personal, often subconscious, and ever-evolving target. We can't expect people to be able to immediately leave their window of tolerance and find successful and healthy reactions, responses, and coping mechanisms with no slip-ups and no unhealthy coping mechanisms. Tahani used her relationship with Jason and the chaos surrounding that as distraction and avoidance, yes, but she also used it as an unhealthy coping mechanism to allow herself to find her window of tolerance again, and then to allow herself to choose when to step out of it. Even though some may call this problematic or manipulative, I do think it's progress. Now, this all gets flipped on its head when Team Cockroach realizes there isn't a way to the good place in Chapter 23, Best Self. After learning from Michael that they can't get to the good place with no plan and the assumption that she's about to be tortured forever, she gives up the coping mechanism and breaks things off with Jason. The work she's done on herself, that she's likely only been able to do because she had the relationship with Jason to distract her from the heavier, deeper stuff, is evident when she does so. She says, "It's probably about time I stopped relying on others for my sense of self-worth or happiness. There's no one who can fix this for me except me." There it is. She's realized it's a perspective issue, and that if she wants to improve her feelings of self-worth, her feelings of happiness, she has to stop looking to others. No more blaming it on her sister or her parents or the employee whose manager she needed to talk to, or Jason or anyone else but her. She has a relapse in Chapter 25, The Burrito, when she risks failing her test to talk to her parents, immediately falling back into the trap of finding joy through the way others engage with her, and immediately placing herself right back into that triangulation. Her mother tells her that her sister Camilla dedicated her last album to Tahani, and then dashes her apparent joy by telling her that the dedication was to her fans, and Tahani is a fan. But this time, Tahani quickly recovers. The work she's been doing on herself kicks in, and we watch as she realizes in real time the triangulated nature of the relationship that she cannot escape through fighting back. She now has experience with this. She realizes that her skills, her identity need to be shifted, and that her theory of relying on external validation being harmful is true. She says it directly to her parents, quote, "which is exactly the point. I was never going to be enough for you. Never going to earn your respect," close quote. And then she breaks the triad, discussing authentic parts of her experience that have meaning to her, but she knows will disappoint them. It's tremendous. She walks out of that room not as a daughter in a lifelong campaign of triangulation, but as an individual no longer weighed down by the need to keep the spotlight of disapproval off of her. And then she's rebooted and has to start over. But when she does get back into the swing of things, she fully leaves the triangulation. Chapter 33, A Fractured Inheritance, shows another quick relapse as she rages at her sister and another quick reset. She sees the impact of the triangulation on her sister's work and realizes that the conceptualization that she had of the outsider, her, as the only one harmed is wrong. Her sister, despite being an insider in the triangulation for most of her life, has also suffered and is not just some golden child. There are several times in The Good Place, even though I've seen it probably literally thousands of times, that I still tear up. And the hug between Tahani and Camilla is one of them. Her empathy, her grace, her understanding, her simple naming of the truth, forcing it to be confronted, truly breaks the triangulation. She says, quote, "I understand that you can't accept my apology because that would quench your creative thirst. They forced us to compete, and that competition has fueled your art for decades. It's so awful, and I'm so sorry." Close quote. And in this moment, there's no going back for Tahani. There's no unseeing what she's seen. But unlike in Chapter 18, Existential Crisis, this isn't a bad thing. It's a good one. It's a necessary next step for her to be able to evolve into the next version of herself, one that she chooses for and by herself. Her window of tolerance has grown so much that she's able to let go of parts of her identity and not see them as a loss, but as an opportunity. Over the next season and a half, Tahani makes great strides in rebuilding her relationship to skill and identity. She realizes in chapter 42, chillaxing, that the conflation of identity and status is something a lot of people struggle with, and is able to use empathy toward that to connect to John. She almost relapses with John, cooking up the burn Mark fake-ups before recognizing it. In chapter 44, Employee of the Baramy, after trying out some new roles, she laments that from now on, she's just going to stick to throwing parties because it's the only thing she's good at. Finally sick of her role as party planner after 300 plus years, she says to Eleanor, quote, "If we ever get through this, I want to learn how to do something meaningful, a real skill, something helpful and fulfilling." This is such a powerful statement to come from Tahani, that after spending millions of hours planning and hosting parties, she doesn't find them fulfilling. But why? She used to. It's because her motivation has changed. Yes, she's no longer motivated to seek the external validation and status that they used to provide. But it's also because she's changed. She doesn't hold so tightly onto her skills in party planning to give her a sense of identity and purpose. And she's not triangulated as an outsider, competing against her sister, propelled by the fear of the spotlight of disapproval from her parents. Her relationship to identity has completely shifted. When she does get to the good place, we see her spend meaningful time with her sister and parents, but we also see her make good on her promise to herself. She learns tons and tons of useful skills, from trade skills like painting walls to craftsmanship like master woodworking, from silly things like burping the alphabet to physical skills like landing a triple axel. She wears jean overalls unironically. She uses her time in paradise to do all the things she could never let herself even dream of doing on Earth, or in the first 801 reboots, or in her second Earth life, because her relationship to skill and identity has evolved so much. Once she's done it all and spent thousands of meaningful days with her family, she encapsulates this amalgamation of skill, growth, and Tahaniness into the final boss of being puppet master for good. Instead of going through the door, she starts building afterlives. It's meaningful, fulfilling work that relies on social capital, empathy, and aesthetics. That truly is #Tahani time. I think a lot of people see emotional growth and healing as this thing that you can just choose to do, or that there's going to be this singular aha moment that's going to make everything better. And then the work will end and you'll be dancing in a white dress on the beach, watching a sunset without a care in the world. Maybe that last one's just me. But I do know from personal experience that growth more often looks like Tahani's. Slow, incremental, with relapses and unhealthy coping mechanisms, and full of unexpected landmines and setbacks. And when the work is done, it doesn't feel finished because there's more life to be lived. And that life is going to throw things in the path that are unexpected, that there aren't yet tools in the toolbox for. But the work has been done, and you are the same person. You've just evolved, iterated, and let go of those things that maybe you were holding too tightly or loosely onto. Tahani was always a puppet master for good, from the first episode to the last. She's a person who cares deeply about using time, place, and atmosphere to create an experience that is meaningful. But the underlying impetus for this caring, and the ways in which those things are expressed, change. They go from being vicarious satisfaction to profound satiation. And I think that's the goal. This show talks often about how one of the most meaningful things a person can do is try to be a little better each day. Tahani shows us that one of the most important parts of that as an action is having the space to choose to do that. And that one of the most important ways to support others as they try is to give grace when they revert or get it wrong or slip up. I really think that's a good lesson for us all, to keep opting in even when it's hard, or, as Tahani says, insert me, coachman. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Welcome Everything is Brainhead. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Remulon.